Hello everybody, my name is Michael, and in today's video what we're going to be doing is we're going to be comparing 3 underpainting techniques for your speed paint miniatures or contrast paints, anything like that, those quick and easy paints that you can use to get those paint jobs done nice and fast. So I'm going to be doing 3 techniques here. So one is going to be the one that they recommend, which is going to be your white priming and then painting over these paints over top and getting the best result you can. Then I'm going to be doing a zenithal highlight prime and giving that some testing and see if that brings that out better than our just plain white primer. And then for the last one, I'm going to be going in with the slapchop technique, which is a technique I haven't actually done before, so it'll be interesting to see what it's like compared to the zenithal and just our plain white primer. So with that, let's get into that video and let's see what these techniques are like compared to each other and see if we can help improve our speed painting. Okay, so for this experiment that we're doing here, I'm going to be using the same colors on every single miniature so we can tell our difference between our different priming styles and underpainting methods. Okay, so starting off with our first underpainting method, which is going to be in our white primer, the one they recommend. What we're going to be doing is starting off with our colors, of course, and we're just going to be applying them as how you're supposed to, just with one thick layer. Not really worrying about anything other than trying to keep them into the areas where we want to paint, because we don't want that paint to be going off to anywhere we don't want it to be, because they can be quite hard to clean up and fix any mistakes. So as you can see here, I'm starting off with gore, grunta, fur, and that's going to be for painting up our horse, and it's just a matter of going around picking out the areas we need, and that's exactly what I'm doing with the subsequent parts in this paint job, is just going through painting them up layer by layer. Okay, so moving on with our next colour, and what I've got here is I'm going to use basilcanum grey, and this is going to be for the hair of our horse on its tail and its mane and stuff like that. Also too, I didn't mention, I'm just using all contrast paints here because I don't actually own any of the other paints. I don't own any of the army paint or speed paints or any of those other types out here. I only unfortunately have the citadel ones, as they were the first ones to come out, and I built up a collection over time, not really thinking that other companies would come out with these sorts of things. And so this is what I've got. So it's going to be my base test line, and I'm not going to change any of the colors here between any of our paint jobs. So they're going to be all the exact same colors in the same places. And then with that painted up, what we're going to do now is come in with some nice Blood Angels red. I'm going to be using this for the sort of saddle area. And as you can see, same colors, all the same places. You can see that as we've just had with just these colors so far, that they all have different consistencies as well, which is also something I wanted to try show off with the different styles. Also why I went with such a different range of colors and tried to get sort of one of every color. I got a red, a blue, a green, stuff like that, just so we can see the differences in those different styles as well. So one thing that'll be interesting to see with these different styles is what the colors will come out like when I'm applying very similar colors to one another. So as you can see here, I'm applying another brown. This one here is snakebite leather, and we place gore, grunta, fur on our horse itself. And because we've got our white prime, we can definitely see the difference in the colors there. So it's going to be interesting when we start getting the zenithal and our slapchop method, whether it'll start balancing out, because there will be very similar layers with the shadows and light places already placed in there. So it'll be interesting to see if they become more distinct or less distinct, and they might start fusing together. So that'll be an interesting thing to take note of as we're going along here. Okay, so here we come in with our green color now, and this is going to be our militarum green now. I'm going to be using this for the armor rather than a sort of bluish silver color, which I'm going to be using for the swords later on. I wanted to have the armor a different color, so like I said before, I want to go with a wider range of colors so you can see a difference in between them. And since these things are very clearly supposed to be sort of like Nazgul-y sort of like people, that they're supposed to be the dark hooded mysterious horse riders and stuff like that. They're all supposed to be very dark blacks and browns, but I chose these because they're very similar models to one another, so you're going to be able to tell the difference in our different underpainting techniques, so we can tell them clearly apart, and we can see what we're trying to do with our experiment here, which is to see how different they come out with these underpainting techniques. So one interesting color I did want to put in here is I did want to put a black, and I'm using black Templar, of course, and I want to place that on here too to see if there is even a difference in the black colors, because as we're applying it over white here, of course it's going to be a lot lighter than our other experiments we're going to be doing later on, but it's going to be interesting to see whether there is actually a difference between the shadows and the highlights between the zenithal and the slapchop, especially with applying a black paint over it, and see if it does actually give any highlights to there at all, or if it's all just going to be straight black and it doesn't matter what you underpaint it like. So like I said, with these experiments we're going to get really into there and in depth and see how they came out. So another thing I wanted to add in was another bright color, so I'm going to be using cyan and yellow. I want to get a nice yellow in there as well. And one thing you notice that these are all the older contrast paints. I don't have any of the newer ones yet, the single pigment ones and these crazy flash new vibrant ones. I only have all the older ones because I brought them all up over time and eventually nearly got the entire original set of the contrast colors, not thinking that they were going to release any more for a long time like that. But hey, I've got to use up what I've got here, and like I said with this experiment, I'm using what I have, and I want to notice if there is a difference even between the old ones and the new or different fancy ones that we have now, so it'll be interesting to see. And as we're nearly finished here, one thing I did notice with this white prime is that every color is distinct. Like, you can definitely, as you can see, there is a little bit of muddiness between the browns, but that's to be expected, of course, when you're using a one coat sort of paint and they're very similar with no sort of variations. You're going to, of course, get some colors that are starting to get a bit close. But as for that, our reds, our blue that we're using right now, and our green, they stand out quite well. And you can see that just with the nice white prime, it's nice and simple paint job, nothing special here, but hey, it gets the job done. And that's what we're going to be doing with our next ones, and seeing if applying these different styles is going to change it up and see if we can get those shadows and highlights and stuff in there for free without doing too much extra work. So let's move on to those next ones with our zenithal priming here. Okay, so coming on with our test underpainting style number 2, and this is going to be our zenithal prime. So this here is when you spray prime in black, and then you just give a nice spray prime over top with white. Now, you can do this either with an airbrush, you could even dry brush this on, or use a rattle can like I did here, which is give a nice heavy coat of black, and then just coming from above, sort of at a 45-degree angle, and just spraying down so it catches all those high points and all those bits that are going to be in the natural and the light. And the idea behind this is that we're going to get a difference as we're applying this paint here. Now again, I'm applying all these paints in the same way as one thick layer. I'm not thinning anything down because I know that can definitely have a nice effect, especially since we're doing zenithal and slapchop like that. It can have a very big effect, but I wanted to do it as each of these paints says on the tin, and that's one big thick coat essentially, and getting the most out of it. I want to see, without applying anything different other than the underpainting style, can we get a different result. So as we can see here with this first layer of paint on, we can see that there is a slight difference. There definitely is some shadow in there, very, very subtle. Probably you're only going to really notice it if you're looking out for it, but that's interesting to know, because as you can see, we've got quite a bit of our zenithal on there, so it is good to see that it does give some sort of difference. So it'll be really interesting to see as we're going on through this paint job and using all those other colors, especially, which is exactly why I said I wanted to use a wider variety of colors to try and gauge how it would work, whether it's going to be better for darker colors or lighter colors, and really try and push this to see what I want to do in the future when I want to speed paint up a bunch of miniatures and just not really think about it. Is it going to be worth my time? So mainly I wanted to do it as a reference to, for myself I should say, to gauge whether I want to, if I ever feel like just painting up a heap of models quickly, whether it be on camera or not on camera, what's going to be the most efficient way and give me a nice look that I'm happy with for as little effort as I possibly can. We're just cutting out a few steps with using these methods here. Most of the time I use, your standard paints rather than these speed paints, but hey, I have a lot of them and I do want to use them as a and I do like some of the effects you can pull off with them even. But it is going to be interesting to see how much with each time investment, whether it just goes with the white or the zenithal or the slapchop, whether adding those couple of minutes is going to help boost it up that much higher for little effort. So it's going to be interesting to see as we're going along here. So one other thing as we're going through these steps, which I don't know if I mentioned or not, is that before applying the next paint, I'm letting each layer to dry individually. I didn't want to accidentally tamper with it, especially on the big areas. I didn't want to try and tamper with the colour too much because I know these colours can mix quite easily, so I try to give them all a little bit of time between each layer, just enough so they can start setting at least before I start applying the next layer, so we don't get any accidental mixing. And I'm trying to put it and show that if you accidentally get any spill over when you're trying to paint carefully together, what it comes out like, does it ruin a piece, stuff like that. But as a general, I think overall in this paint job, I didn't get very much of any paint I didn't want to in an area I didn't want to pretty much at all. So tried to keep that to a minimum, but as depending on your experience level, you could accidentally touch one paint to another and get some mixing issues, but that's exactly why I want to let them dry just a little bit for each color, so I have a few seconds to try and fix a mistake if one does pop up. Okay, so now we've got all those areas applied. You can see that we've basically got our miniature finished, and we have some of our effects with our painting here to really show up just by adding in a quick zenithal prime, how much of a difference we can get. So it'll be interesting to see how it comes out like in the end, especially like I said, at the end we're going to do comparisons between each one, where I'll show you each one and we'll get a different if there is a difference or not, or whether we're all the same. So let's move on to the next technique, which is the one I haven't done yet, so it'll be interesting to know if this is going to change it. And this is supposed to be the big revolutionary one that's taking over the internet by storm, so let's move on to that technique and see how that comes out. Okay, so now it's time for the hip new technique that's taking over the internet by storm, and that is using the slapchop method. Now the slapchop method involves a bit more underpriming and being a bit more selective with what we're doing here, which is adding dry brushing in and giving us some depth with our shadows and highlights by giving a dry brush over with different colors, as the main colors seem to be going with the gray and then coming over with a very bright, a pure white at the very highest point, so you get the biggest range of shadows to highlights with the miniature. So as you can see, coming in here with our neutral grey, I just went with the most neutralist grey I could come across here, so we don't get any other colour influence. Like I said, I want to keep these relatively controlled with our colours to see how they come out, because I don't want to divert too much, so we can see them in their most purest form. But I can see how, especially with this technique, you could add in a lot of interest by dry brushing in some other colors into the mix. So as you can see here, just carefully going around, really picking up those high points and giving a good overall dry brush, really making sure that I've got a nice healthy layer of colors in there, because like I want to be able to make it so it's seeable and so I can tell if there is a difference or not. Okay, so now we have that first layer down. Now we're going to come in with a brighter gray, and this one here is going to be a sea gray, and this is even lighter again. It's like it doesn't seem like, from what I've seen, that there's a limit of how many layers of dry brushing you can do up to your highest point of color. I'm just going to go with a couple here. So what I'm going to do, start off with our neutral gray, come in with our sea gray here, and then I'm going to come in with one more with our white. So we've got a couple of layers here, and hopefully we can really see the transitions between them. But like I said, I haven't done this technique before, so I hope I'm doing it justice and really trying to show off how you're supposed to do this, and really hope it's going to come out like how they seem to show on the internet with these amazing paint jobs that can be done with very little effort with controlling our underbrushing in terms of the actual painting over top with our colors here. So like I said, it could still be a little bit of a learning curve for me, but just trying to get the overall idea and give you the picture so you can compare them for yourself. And then now it's time for our highest highlight, and that's going to be matte white. And for the slapchop technique, it does appear that you want to go with actual white as your last color, a really striking, bright, vibrant white, to get the full effect, so you can really tell the transitions between that highest point to the lowest shadow point as well. So really hopes to help add it in here. So just giving it another good overall dry brush, but really applying a lot lighter pressure on there, so I'm really only catching the highest points and the edges and things like that. And then with that complete, we can then start moving on to our painting and see if we do get any actual difference in here between, especially this and the zenithal. I'm be very interested to see the difference between. Is there enough to justify it, or is it not really worth bothering? Is it just zenithal and quickly get it done? So now we can move on to our colouring step. So as you can see here, same colours again, no difference in the way I'm applying the paint as well. Still the one thick layer. I'm not going with any of thinning any of the paints down, which I could definitely see would be a huge benefit to our slap chop technique here. As you can see, immediately as I place it down, you can automatically see all the slightly different variations, especially from that white to the transition down to the actual black. You can immediately see the difference in the color there, and if you were to thin this out even more, you get even better transitions. But like I said, it's all going to be a controlled test environment essentially, so I want to make sure that it's all the same layer of paint, not trying to trick you or give you any false hope and try to sway you one way or the other. Just trying to keep it nice and neutral to see what technique you would like to use when you're painting up your miniatures in a nice quick way. And as we're going through all these different colors here, you can see that we're between some of them we're getting some really difference in our especially from our highlights to our shadows, which is even different than the zenithal. Which is quite interesting to note with a few of these colors, is that the stark difference just by adding in the brightest bright white and then that shadow, and with a little bit of transitions in between, even though it can be hard to tell that there's actually a transition in color between those highlights and shadows, that it seems to really highlight the difference in them when that paint is getting into those recesses and settling in. It does apply a pretty much immediate stark contrast, so it's very interesting in terms of that, but it's still going to be a carry on and wait until we've got all our paint down to notice if there is a difference overall, and really wait until it's dry and we've got a nice settled in color to see if it really does provide a difference in our style. And you know, this technique's taking over the internet by storm, especially since people are coming up with Zenithal 2.0 now, Zenithal 3.0 and stuff like that, and I haven't tried any of it. I've seen a lot of videos online and they do look like they're amazing paint jobs, but like I said with this video, I just want to go with, for a little amount of time, quick paint job. If you want to paint up a bunch of miniatures at once, what's going to be the best for you. And also, this might be a technique that I want to use in the future, and it's also just a video of my first sort of dabble with our slap chop technique. So it'd be interesting to hear from you guys whether you like this technique and you'd like to see it in more other paint jobs that I do here, because I probably will be using it later on, maybe even introduce different colors with our dry brushing and that. Just some interesting things that look like that can be done with this technique, so I'll be interested to see where it goes, and especially since the craze has taken over so much of the internet now, I can definitely see why people are having a lot of fun with it. It does apply some pretty much immediate results compared to even the zenithal, where the shadow was sort of a little bit subtler. This here has got a nice big striking difference, so that's at least one thing you can see immediately. But it's going to be interesting as we're getting on with those other colors. Does it influence them at all with our blues and our greens and stuff like that? And then as we're completing our colors here, you can see that with a few of the areas, like such as the armor and the sword and things like that, you actually do have an immediate difference between the slap chop and the zenithal by highlighting the very points with our very bright colors to our dull colors. It does apply some immediate interest into the piece and really does give it a range of colors. So that is very interesting to notice as we're painting it up here. But what we're going to do now is we're going to move on and see how all three of them came out side by side, so we can get a really good comparison and see which one I like best, see which one you like best yourself, and which ones you would use if you were to paint up a lot of creatures and monsters and armies, or just a one-off miniature that you think you don't want to spend a lot of time, but you want to make it look as good as you can with the shortest amount of steps involved. Okay guys, and there we have it. There is our three test subjects right next to each other, with our white primed miniature, our zenithal primed miniature, and our last but not least, our slap chop miniature. So you can see that there is quite a difference between them, and it's not a lot of effort. It just depends on what you're looking for. So you can see with the white one, our colors are very much as they sort of try to portray. I know the bottles can be a little bit deceiving with what color they come out like, but as a general, the colors are right there. But if you want to add in just a bit of subtle shadowing, it's not that hard to add just that little bit of extra step by giving that zenithal prime so you can get the shadows right in there and add that punch. But if you want the maximum punch, I think the best way is the slapchop. Now, I know I'm still new to this technique, and I find that if I practice this a little bit more, you can get some amazing results very, very quickly. So totally up to you want to do here. If you want to spend that extra, say, I would say by the time if you go really practice at it, within about 10-15 minutes, you could have a really good slap chopped model in the preparation stage before applying that paint. To just, if you want to spend like literally, I'd say maybe 10 seconds to zenithal prime a miniature if you're using a rattle can, take you no time at all. But if you're going with the dry brushing on either of them, the slap chop is the way to go. And you can see that with all these pictures as they're going by here with our finished models, that it's not a lot of effort, and you can add in some surprising results by just doing a few little things. So I hope this video has been helpful for you guys, whether you want to follow along what I did here, or you just want to use the video as some inspiration in painting up your own miniatures. And I'd just like to say, if you enjoyed what I did here, please don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And that really helps me out here on the channel. But with all that said, guys, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I can't wait to see you all in the next video.